Now, the National Arts Festival in Makhanda in the Eastern Cape is officially underway. This year's festival is significant as it commemorates 50 extraordinary years of creative freedom and highlights South African art, theatre and music. But what is the state of theatre in South Africa? To help us unpack this, we're joined by Vuyisile Mshudulu, apologies, Arts and Heritage Director at the City of Johannesburg, Mpho Molepo, who is the Director of the Alex Theatre Company, and Momo Matsunyane, a performer and Standard Bank Young Artist for Theatre 2023. To my guests, all of you, thank you so much for joining us. I think it's an opportune time to talk about the state of theatre. And I'd like to start with you, Mpho, being the founder and director of the Alex Theatre and Company. How would you categorize the state of theatre in South Africa?
Thank you very much. I think I'll just try and go back a bit just to put it in context. So taking us from 1994 is that we then inherited 6 national theatres across the country, which are fully funded by the state. And whereas majority of practitioners have always been out of the system, because the previous government had those 6 national theatres, which also they are not in the 9 provinces. So you still have private theatre companies that are still out there. You have private theatres that are owned privately. You have casino theatres that are owned by casinos. And you have individual-owned theatres, spaces, and you have what we now call alternative spaces. So if you look at the last 30 years, is that the key question I think that comes in is, were we able to transform the inherent field, the field that we've inherited, were we able to transform it to make sure that it becomes inclusive of everybody else and every player? But what has happened with us is that we maintained the 6 theatres, and then we started looking at programs that could be able to try and bring everyone on board. For an example, creation of the National Arts Council as a funding unit to try and fund key players that are outside the system of being funded by the state, at least to have access to funds so that they can also become key roles. But we haven't sat down and started looking at how we truly transform the 6 theatres, but also to make sure that all the other provinces have got theatres.
Yeah.
And I think it's in the last 3 years that we started working in developing a new national theatre and dance policy in the country. And I can openly say it has now been approved by cabinet. And I think we'll be looking at how we now introduce it to the sector. Which
is so necessary, right?
Yes.
To step in the right direction. And for you, Momo, no stranger to the stage at all, how would you categorize the state of theatre in our country today?
That's a tricky one. What I will say is that I've noticed a significant shift in a hunger for live performance post-COVID. I think people want to be out. I mean, that could obviously be a direct result of the isolation that we experienced and having to kind of learn new ways of connecting with one another artistically. The online theatre scene kind of popped up and died very quickly because, as we know, theatre depends on a live interaction. Yeah. So I've seen a lot of increase in audiences, audience attendance, which is great for us as performers, yes. You know, because before we were really struggling. But I think also we are battling with how theatre is sold. That is still a very big issue. We're not marketing the shows as well as we could. I think the same way that products are sold on television, I think theatre needs to be sold to people like that. I think also there's a lot of inaccessibility, yeah. And the shows and the theatres that Mpho is talking about, for example, those mainstream spaces, some people who live in townships that have theatres don't even think they're allowed inside some of those spaces. So how do we make sure that theatre is accessible and people understand that this is something that we can actively take part in and grow, yeah. Outside of using those theatres for halls, for meetings, local meetings, or concerts, or stand-up shows. But how do we actually sell theatre? Yeah. But I think one of the reasons we struggle with that is because people don't necessarily understand what to expect. It's not like saying this is a bottle of water, this will quench your thirst. You know, it's yeah. like shows are different. So how do you sell something like theatre? But I think post-COVID, theatre is very much alive. I won't lie. There's so much happening. So much happening. So many people are creating new works. spaces are hosting, and more open now to us younger people taking part in the mainstream as opposed to before.
And that's encouraging to hear as well, Momo, when you're talking about the post-COVID recovery. And I want to bring the conversation to you here, Vuyisile, because as the city as well, there have been initiatives that you have come up with, like Jazz and the Lights, to try and bring awareness about the arts as well, and to get people to make it sellable, as you're mentioning as well. Tell us about just that journey of trying to recuperate post-COVID.
Look, obviously, thanks for the opportunity and greetings to the viewers. The sustainability and the functioning of theatre is heavily dependent on the audiences, you know. And I think that there's a very important component about audience development. But in order for you to be able to have a solid audience base, I think I want to step back a little bit and ask, what is theatre, and what does theatre mean for us, you know? And I think that I want to look at theatre, South African theatre, in three forms. Firstly, the form, the function, and the substance of theatre, you know. And if you look at the form of theatre, I think what we have become accustomed to is theatre that has been prescribed by our colonial history, you know. And we have not had enough time to look at theatre from an Afrocentric perspective. So that there is an easy resonance and a relationship between African audiences and theatre in itself, you know. And I think that we have to understand what theatre meant for us in the pre-colonial era. And once we get an understanding of what the function of theatre has been in the African cosmology, I think it will be very easy to, you know, to have that resonance and a general appreciation for theatre that is much wider than it is currently, you know. And I think when you look at the form that our theatre takes, you know, Mpho spoke about, you know, the institutions, the theatre institutions. But there were, I mean, Ubaba Zeksimda, you know, makes a beautiful point about the difference between protest theatre and resistance theatre. You know, there were different forms that theatre took, you know, in the pre-1994 era and even the pre-colonial era. But let's look at the pre-1994 era. You know, you had very strong protest theatre works, but you also had very strong theatre works that draws from African experiences that were able to mobilize people. But in the post-1994 era, it's almost as if there has been a disincentive, you know, for theatre production to be true to the essence of who we are, and for theatre to take a certain form that would be much more acceptable in terms of the neo-colonial you know, phase that we're entering. And I think theatre has always played an important role in shaping society, you know, and being a catalyst for even defining the character of society. And I think only when, you know, people feel a great sense of, you know, themselves in the theatre that is being produced, and that now speaks to the substance of theatre. What is the quality of the shows? What's the quality of the messaging? Are people producing theatre because they want it to be palatable to the funder? Or do they want are they driven by the natural instinct to create works irrespective of how critical those works may be of the status quo?
And that dilemma as well of trying to also pander to the funders while also being creative and artistic must be a very difficult fine line to kind of straddle through. As the state, as government, do you think you're doing enough to assist the likes of, you know, the Alex Theatre Company and Academy to make sure that the likes of, we have more Zeksimdas coming out of here?
Look, I mean, the city of Johannesburg is quite unique in the way that it operates. And I think I've often faced the question, people asking me, who are your counterparts in the other metros, for example? What do they do in terms of the arts? You know, because we have had such a huge impact in terms of all the levels that we're operating at. For example, we play a critical role in talent identification and cultivation, where it's not a sexy area because, you know, you are not dealing with people who are famous, such as Momo, you know. So you're dealing with really identifying very raw talent and cultivating it. And we've been working closely with institutions such as Alex Academy, you know. But we also then understand that there has to be a trajectory of growth for these people that we identify and we cultivate. And we've taken them through, you know, intermediate markets to more established markets, and then now they're becoming globally, you know, competitive products that can be presented. And we've done that work. But what for me is critical is that we can't prescribe as the state what the voice of the theater maker should be and what the vibration of that voice should be. What we need to do is to look at how we create an enabling environment, you know, for theater to be driven by, you know, more truthful, more authentic, and more forms of more honest forms of expression, you know. So that's really for me the critical element. And I feel like, you know, there's almost a self-censorship in theater makers wanting to tell stories, you know, that are more flowery. And I think there's also we must look at the impact of the transition from 93 to 94 was that there was a lot of censorship that happened to enable a smoother transition to, you know, the Codesification and the rainbowification of South Africans, you know, which may not necessarily, as we are experiencing, have been, you know, suitable for the lived experiences, particularly of black people. And I think black theater makers really have to interrogate what that moment has meant to them and how they can, you know, revert to being more true to themselves in the stories that they tell, irrespective of whether they are funded or not, you know. And that David Kolwane always said, you know, I am an artist because I'm an artist, not because I'm funded to be one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, on a daily, you interact with that raw talent and you see these young people who are our next Zakes Mdas, our next Momo Matsunyane, right? What are some of the challenges that they are facing, trying to crack it into this industry?
I think maybe just an overview of the last 30 years or experiences that I see on a daily basis working with young people is that at the moment, everyone wants to be a star. And I don't think most are really prepared to travel the journey that actually take you there. You know, it's easy for someone to say, Mr. Molepo, ke kopa unkenye. You know? Yeah, so ke tla ukenya jwang, because it took me 20 years to be where I am, you know. And somebody else might take them a day, it might take them a month, but our journeys are not the same.
Yeah.
But in actual fact, young people need to be prepared to be able to travel the journey to become what they really want to become. But it's not an easy one. You know, I always say to people that we are in an industry where you are as good as your last job.
Yeah.
But you do not have security of the next one. And it doesn't confirm because you were in this particular show, then you will be able to get the next one. You are going to auditions until you are 90 years, you know? And that's the nature of our industry. But also on the other hand, we are in an industry that does not have big value for education. The fact that you have a degree, it means nothing. You have to go through the audition and all of that. So, and as a result, because of the non-regulation of the industry itself, it has now become a free-for-all kind of an industry. So everyone who fails in another sector, they easily say, I think ngailo actor or ngabina or ngadancer, when they fail from any other sectors, because it's an easy access. It's a free-for-all. It's non-regulated. There are no creative standards that are set in the industry. Even in terms of payments and whatever, you negotiate your fee as you go along.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you are 30 years in the industry, now you are under this category or whatever, because of that non-regulation part of it. And I think we need to go back. We need to be able to say, if we are really intending to create an industry, industries are regulated.
Yeah.
And we should be able to start from those basics.
Momo, you know, Mr. Molepo speaks about traveling the journey. For anyone watching who's thinking, oh, this is a nice fallback in case my plan A doesn't work out, if you could just explain that journey that they would actually have to go through. Give us your experience.
I've been doing this for 20 years, and it's only now that things seem to be looking up. Okay, I started professionally acting at the age of 14, and I had the typical dream. I come from a family of artists, filmmakers, and all of directors. And so...
And one would think then it would be a little easier for you, right?
Comrade, not so much. It was the opposite.
Yeah.
And because of that, my family made it very clear to me that please don't expect any kind of handouts. We want you to earn your place in the industry, and we want people to take you seriously because you are talented.
Yeah.
And that mustn't sound or look like you are where you are because of us,
No,
right?
please.
So they literally left me to my own devices, Keita. And after varsity, so like I said, I started at 14, and then after varsity, before varsity, my father said to me, if you're really serious about being an artist, I would suggest that you go get an education. I want you to not just be an artist, but an artist who is informed and whose work will be critical in how you put it together, and understanding things from representation and gender or whatever, framing, right? And so I went to school, and I thought after varsity, it's on. Get up, get a agent, and then I'm going to be a superstar.
Bob's your uncle.
Not so much. And because of that, so it was very difficult. And at the time when we had just graduated, we were dealing with things like couch casting and understanding the realities of the industry, that people get jobs, some people get jobs because of who they know, because of who they're having sexual relations with. And so myself and 3 other ladies got together, as well as Kiti Mwebang, and we decided to create a sketch comedy group where we would create our own work and speak back to these things that we were facing as young black women at the time. And so we created the group, and we just started making use of the independent spaces. At the time, there was the platform, there was Pop Art, there was Joburg Theatre Space.com, the Olive Tree Theatre. So these were the spaces that allowed us to put on work without necessarily paying exorbitant fees like you would at a mainstream space, right? So you're literally functioning on like door takings. And it's not much, boo. There's 4 of you, you're splitting 4,000. You're like, mara, at least this time.
And how are you getting by, you know? How are you paying rent? How are you buying food?
I don't know. I don't know how we did it. It was hard.
Yeah.
I think for the really like the beginning parts of our careers, we were highly dependent on our parents. They were helping us get by. You know, the shows we were creating were things, I'm asking my father, I'm taking this from the house, and literally like kherezing.
La Jerez, yeah.
In order to just put on one show. But the resilience and understanding that this is going to take time. At some point, we started getting noticed. We started being invited. We ended up hosting things like Savannah Comics Choice Awards and, you know, awarding Buntate Juma Fela, the Lifetime Achievement Award. So we started seeing that, okay, cool, there's value in the thing we're doing. But it's not an easy journey. And I think before people think they can get into the arts, you need to really know what it is that you want. I want to tell stories. I believe in my voice as a young black woman. I believe in my talent. I believe in my country. But it's just a pity that, you know, we are not supported in the ways that we'd like to be.
Yeah.
It's a struggle. Being an artist is very difficult in this country, and you have to diversify. Thinking that all you'll do is act for the rest of your life is foolish, and it's ignorant. You have to diversify. I teach acting, I write, I direct. Yeah, I've had to do a whole bunch of things to get by. It's not easy at all. And nowadays people look at social media and think like you can just pop off of one video, and you have someone who has one video that's like 30 seconds long, and then networks are suddenly like, oh, they're so popular because their video got like 1 million views, and suddenly you switch on your TV and that person is a lead in a drama series, you know, and you're sitting there with all your experience, with all your education, and it means absolutely nothing. And you're constantly told, channel went for this person. And if you look at all our shows, and no hate to all my fellow colleagues, but you're literally seeing the same actors on every single show, and they're just changing costume.
When you hear that kind of sentiment from artists like Momo as well, and even though you are doing what you can as the city of Joburg too, what more can you do to try and assist artists? Are there more programs that you can run, more funding that you can perhaps give?
I think we need to understand that, you know, theatre, like the arts, are a microcosm of the South African economy. They are a microcosmic reflection of the economy. And by that, I mean that you have to understand what Frantz Fanon calls the pitfalls of nationalism, and how those pitfalls have created a post-independent structure that does not work for the aspirations of the majority in the country, So the struggles that artists have are not unique to them, The people in the building industry, for example, who have been a bricklayer for 30 years and being paid the same meager, wages, are similar because the system is designed to trap, the majority, particularly of the natives, which are black people in this country, in a particular realm, and to elevate a few as a possible aspiration for everyone, And what this has created is really a dire situation where the contestation becomes so fierce, because all of us are now competing for the same, small pot of resources. Secondly, I mean, logic must tell you these institutions, for example, the performing arts centers, these big theaters were built during apartheid. But there's been a deliberate and almost intentional disinvestment because we should have had a greater infrastructural development and even investment in production. There were production companies that were running in these things. But all of these things is part of the disinvestment campaign to make the African state a failed state, and this is the post-independence reality. And I think the artists have a responsibility because they have a third eye to see through the veil of exactly what is the real problem. Because now we're dealing with symptoms of the problem, and the real problem is the theater of today must reflect those problems in the same way that, the pre-colonial theater in Africa that Ngugi wa Thiong'o writes so beautifully about when he uses the Ituka as an example. The Ituka is a ceremonial, change of power from one generation to another, which happened every 25 years. And when it happens, there would be a 6-month theatrical performance, which informs the songs, the dances, the poetry. They inform the governance for the next generation that's going to take over, And this is the role that theater played in Africa. But today, we are, captured in this mind-numbing entertainment of using the arts as a tool for entertainment, And the arts is a very powerful instrument for reawakening, but it's also a pliable instrument for cognitive paralysis.
I could continue this conversation for hours and hours and hours, and I really would want to say that I want you to come back to continue this conversation because it's very, very important. Unfortunately, I've run out of time. All the best to all of you. The arts is something that we all need, especially now when we're talking about our new government of national unity and seeing how it'll be translated in the arts as well. So to all three of you, I really appreciate you for coming into the studio.
We hope it's a pre-unity.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
These are my guests. That was Vuyisile Mshudulu as Director of the Arts, Culture and Heritage at the City of Johannesburg, as well as Mpho Molepo, who is the founder and director of the Alex Theatre Company and Academy, and Momo Matsunyane, who's a performer, a playwright and Standard Bank Young Artist for the Year Theatre for 2023.